This will be the final video in the mineral series, and we're going to start off with some of the conclude with some of the micro minerals, and one that is especially important in our region of California, and that's selenium. If you look on the map, you'll notice that there are a lot of Northern California regions that are selenium deficient. And we know it, and especially in ruminant production, we need to be aware of what that selenium deficiency can cause. And we need to understand that selenium is a very important antioxidant. And we'll explain what antioxidants are when we get into the vitamin section. But it helps protect the body and works closely with vitamin E in that function. And as an antioxidant, that means it is important in the immune system, and additionally, very important in the production of thyroid hormones that help regulate growth and those types of activities within the body. The sources that we're going to utilize for selenium are going to vary by geographic location. It's important to note that there's a very fine line between selenium deficiency and selenium toxicity. At either ends of the spectrum and on the extremes, selenium deficiency or toxicity can cause mortality or death in livestock. So we do have to be careful with selenium, and it is regulated by the USDA as to how much we can put in our livestock feeds to try to make sure we do not go too far to a toxicity status. When we get into the deficiency itself, and these are the ones represented by the pictures, you'll see the cardiac tissue at the top, and that is a normal heart and a heart that has gone through what we call white muscle disease. And it's a degenerative muscle disorder that is caused by a deficiency in selenium, especially in the ruminant livestock. And what happens is basically it's not a calcification, but it's like a calcification of the tissue. And we start losing muscle tone and muscle function. And as a result, the muscle will actually atrophy and diminish. And the lamb you see on the bottom is a newborn lamb that is suffering from white muscle disease. They're weak, the muscle's starting to lose tone, and it's something that is very common in our region. In fact, one of our standard operating procedures is to give a selenium injection to every lamb that is born at the sheep unit because we know the selenium status of our soil and our plants. On the flip side of that, though, if you get too high, and it is a narrow window, like I said before, you get what is called alkali disease, and that will actually also be fatal for animals and livestock. A few more pictures of some animals exhibiting signs of white muscle disease and the atrophy that can come from that, where they can't stand, they need support, and it is treatable if caught early. However, if you do allow it to continue, you do run the risk of the muscle atrophy being more permanent. And so that's why a lot of operations in Northern California, where I grew up in Nevada, we knew we were selenium deficient, and therefore our standard operating procedure is to give an injection of what we call BOSI, which is a commercially available injectable selenium. The next mineral that we're going to talk about is iodine. And iodine, it's kind of got an interesting history. It's predominantly, or its role is in thyroid function, proper functioning of the thyroid gland, and energy metabolism. One of the sources you'll see in feeds that is the source of iodine is EDDI. And danged if I can't remember what it stands for. It's like ethyl something something iodide. But you'll see that in the ingredient list, especially on show feeds and stuff like that. That's going to make sure it has a little bit of iodine. Otherwise, it's going to vary by geographic location in terms of what levels of iodine the feeds have within them. One of the fascinating things about iodine is that the deficiency and the toxicity result in the same symptoms, which is goiter. And goiter is simply an inflammation of the thyroid gland. And if you look at the stillborn calf that's in the top picture, again, these are those old pictures that I have of some of the deficiencies. And you can also see it in the bottom dairy calf. You'll see the enlargement on the throat, and that's an enlargement of the thyroid gland. I have another picture that you see some of the reduced production in the sheep on top, but you'll see a normal thyroid gland, and then to the right of it is the enlarged thyroid glands. It's what they're supposed to look like size-wise, and so very dramatically enlarged. And there's also another picture of a single lamb with the enlarged thyroid gland that's showing some of the symptoms of goiter. Now, what's interesting is people back in the olden days, thinking medieval times and up to probably the 1800s or so, people would get goiter because of an iodine toxicity. And that's where we actually developed the concept of iodized salt. So by iodizing our salt, and that was the salt given to people, we were able to actually drastically reduce the issues of iodine deficiency in the human population. That's why you can buy iodized salt or kosher salt that's not iodized. Either way, but that's something that you can purchase at the store. My mom still freaks out if I do not cook with iodized salt because of the issues with goiter. So just kind of funny that in today's society, we've gone back to not iodizing our salt. But I think it's important to understand the history of why we did that was to combat iodine deficiency in the mass population. Iron is another one that's extremely important, and especially important in swine. It's essential in certain proteins of the electron transport chain. Remember, we had those 3 or 4 proteins that were embedded in the mitochondrial membrane that the electrons were transported through? Guess what? They need iron. And so we have to have iron prevalent in the animal system to be able to make sure those proteins are synthesized and functioning properly. But we also know iron more commonly in its role in hemoglobin and in the red blood cells to help with oxygen transport throughout the body. If we get into an iron deficiency, we're going to be dealing with anemia, which is a reduction of red blood cells, which makes sense when you think about the importance of it in hemoglobin. If we don't have that iron there, we're not going to have as many of the red blood cells and the animal is going to go slightly anemic. You're also going to see diarrhea, hypothermia, and reduced food intake because of all these other things that are going on. A lot of times in our feeds, you're going to see ferrous sulfate, ferrous carbonate, ferrous oxide, something ferrous. And that's going to indicate that we have iron added to our feeds. A lot of times you see the red mineral blocks. They're red because they have added iron to them, and that's what gives it that color. One thing that I do want to make note of is in swine production, because sow's milk is actually fairly low in iron, and there is not good transfer of iron across the placental membranes from the mother to the fetuses, that one of the standard operating procedures for swine production is to give injectable iron to make sure those young offspring and those piglets have that iron needed to get their electron transport chain running and to help transport oxygen around their bodies. So that's just one of those standard operating procedures in production that we make sure happens because of how swine metabolize iron and how those newborn offspring have access to it. That's going to wrap up the minerals discussion. This is the 4th of the videos. And just remember, while minerals are not needed in large quantities, they are extremely important in cellular function in our animals. And frankly, it's one of the cheapest insurance policies a producer can utilize, is to find a good free choice mineral developed for the region and offer it free choice. And just make sure that you have supplement out there for your livestock. That's one of the simplest things that you can do. And for example, at the sheep unit, we utilize a mineral supplement made in the Central Valley of California, but it has added selenium and those nutrients that we need up in our region and fits what we have really, really well. Plus, we also provide plain old salt, sodium chloride, at all times to our sheep. So we are supplementing with both a mineral supplement that includes macro and micro minerals and also sodium chloride, just good old salt. to make sure that they stay hydrated and electrolytes and the body's functioning at an optimal pH. And yes, that is what I think about as I tell my crew we have to make sure the salt is out for the sheep, is making sure that all the body parts are working at a high level. Especially right now, we're getting ready to go into our breeding season, and we want to make sure those ewes are going to be able to ovulate and cycle and do everything that we want them to do. So guess what? It all starts with the electrolytes and pH balance in the body, making sure those animals have what they need. So this wraps up the minerals. Don't forget to do the required reading that I posted on Blackboard.